Welcome to ideological economics. In this podcast, I want to contrast the leadership between Russia and Germany. I want to focus on two aspects. First, I want to discuss the outcomes that the leaders from these two great European countries have brought to the nations, to their respective nations. And secondly, I want to discuss how perhaps the more fundamental reasons that these two countries have quite so different leaders and leadership styles. The root cause, if you know what I mean. Obviously, I don't want to limit today's discussion to the scope of current events, but I want to go back a couple of decades. And in fact, mostly the last decade. And I want to show that things have arrived to today's current point for a reason, right? So let's begin. Today's podcast, I think, is going to be brief. I hope I will be able to make it concise enough. First, let's talk about the outcomes. I want to focus on 4 points, right? I want to contrast, of course, the two countries. First, Russia is prepared for difficulties, while Germany expects, or has expected, or maybe had expected, that the good days would last forever. Right? How did Russia prepare for difficulties? It had already foreseen that in some time in this decade, its relationship with the West would deteriorate. And from, I think, the last 3 years, perhaps, Russia had already had the foresight or knowledge, or perhaps the anticipation that it would be cut off the SWIFT interbank messaging system, that some of trade would be restricted. And this is why, and this became very obvious since 2014, events in 2014 and 2015. So Russia has been preparing itself by doing several things. It had paid off its debt, so it's really a country that doesn't have a lot of debt. And to the extent that it has debt, those debts are really trivial and they are used more like a financial instrument. The Russian government runs a surplus. Of course, you can say that it's a country that exports a lot of natural resources, and therefore it is easy for it to run a surplus. But nevertheless, it is a government that runs a surplus. It's not in debt. Russia has supplemented a lot of the technological, more advanced manufactured goods to domestic production. And Russia has achieved self-reliance in terms of food supplies. And of course, it is one of the only countries in the world where it has all the essential resources, natural resources that it needs, that a modern industry needs, right? So after making these preparations, Russia is one of the only countries in the world that can live by itself, cut off from the rest of the world. And of course, sanctions would bring a lot of difficulties economically and also in terms of technological development. But the Russian government, the Russian leadership prepared to the best of its abilities for the difficulties. Contrast that to Germany. What did Germany do? Germany went full woke. Germany shut down its nuclear power plants. Germany became reliant. Actually, I saw a graph posted on Zero Hedge today, this morning, where a graph which I think is based on data available on Statistica, that shows that Germany is one of the few countries in Europe, not the only one, of course, that has seen its reliance or energy self-sufficiency drop, or dependence on Russian fossil fuels or energy imports increase. That is certainly not very smart. Obviously, Germany has also outsourced, sold a lot of its industries. I have been looking at, in recent weeks, some more traditional German hand tools, and I just find that it is very difficult to find good brands that are still made in Germany. There are some, but I don't know for how long, because after this current disaster, I don't know if these companies can still sustain, right? Because their cost is already very extraordinarily high. The similar products, of course, the ones that are still made in Germany are of stellar quality, but the same thing compared to those made in Taiwan, you are paying 4 times the price. Compared to those made in China, you're paying 6 to 10 times the price. That is something that if their costs continue to rise, if the cost, because the raw materials and energy cost doubles, triples, I can't imagine whether these companies can still survive and manufacture in Germany, which is why I decided to buy some hand tools from Germany. I thought these are going to be with me for a long time. But anyway, Germany has not prepared for difficulties. The second point is that Russia has protected its interests. Obviously, in the 1990s, there was a completely different leadership. That leadership was was a treasonous one. It was a traitorous one that completely sold off the wealth and the natural resources and the people of the country. And that was one that will not be treated well in history books. But of course, the current leadership in Russia is completely different. It has looked after Russian interests, and it has sought to protect Russian interests. At the same time, you see, they have also protected the credibility. Russia has not defaulted on its debt and has not defaulted on its contracts. So it also protects its reputation. Contrast that with Germany. Germany has surrendered a lot of its decision-making power to NATO, the European Union, and these supranational organizations, and of course, lest we forgot, the White House. Of course, they have surrendered their decision-making powers, and as a result, some of the decisions, some of the policies that have been implemented in Germany, that have been forced down the throat of Germany, have harmed German industry. Its automotive industry has been really already harmed or damaged by European regulations, which a lot of them are nonsense, right? The cars are made more complex, less reliable, way less durable, just so there can be some imaginary savings in fuel costs. But the overall cost of environmental damage is higher because the parts break down and they need to be replaced more frequently, and because the vehicle cannot last long and it will have to be essentially recycled, quote unquote, otherwise known as junked, at a premature age. That is not protecting the environment, that is damaging the environment. But hey, that's just how things has to go, right? And more recently, we see that Germany begrudgingly, under the weak and incompetent leadership of Olaf Scholz, decided to cut off, basically essentially cancel its obligations. With regards to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, now it's basically going along with the EU to cut off the purchase of Russian gas, oil, and coal. We'll see how exactly that will happen. I don't know how they are going to get the energy. I think perhaps next year there's going to be some new, let's just say variant, whatever variant, that is going to force people not to travel. They have to be locked in their homes, where at the same time central heating will be kept down, and perhaps there will be some rolling blackouts, and factories will open 3 days a week, 2 days a week, and food will be rationed. And that is the future. That is the future. That's the interest. How does that serve Germany? I cannot understand that. And then the third point. Russia prepares and plans for emergencies. Right? It builds relationships. Russia is, a lot of people have sometimes valid, sometimes invalid criticism of Russia. They say that, especially with regards to the government, perhaps it is not democratic enough. Perhaps the nation is not free enough. Or perhaps there are too much corruption in the system. A lot of that could be true. But internationally, Russia is really smart in building bridges, in making friends. Russia is not ideological. It's really different from the Soviet times. It is not ideological. It is it builds friendship, relationship with other nations based on mutual interest. In this regards, I think it's rather similar to the Chinese leadership in recent decades, which is to build relationship with nations. You don't benefit from having an extra enemy, but you do benefit from having an additional friend. And this is something that Russia had been building, and this has really helped Russia internationally in the current situation. Germany, on the other hand, what has Germany done? It has thrown around threats against a lot of nations in the Middle East, Asia, in Africa, saying that they're not democratic, right? That they do not, they don't meet Germany's or the European standards when it comes to governance. Now, perhaps those are true. Not fully, but perhaps some elements of that criticism may be true, may be valid. But that is an opinion you keep to yourself. What benefit does it bring for you to insult countries that could be your partners? Do you want to do some regime change? That is some moronic way, right? But at the same time, Germans, they don't necessarily protect their citizens. They don't protect their businesses, right? To some extent, actually, Angela Merkel was quite protective of German industry. I give her that. But Olaf Scholz, this guy does not protect his German industries. I don't know what this guy thinks. Maybe this guy thinks that Germany has the best technology in the world, that it doesn't need to cooperate with the rest of the world, or perhaps only needs to collaborate or cooperate with the Americans and some select more worthy Europeans. Perhaps it's just because he is too weak to protect. He perhaps understands that it is not the best for Germany, but he is too weak a leader to do so, to do anything about it. Right, and the fourth point, and this is something that I've heard people say in recent days, and I think it's quite an interesting point, which is about mistakes. When Russia makes a mistake, it almost seems as if they were intentional in committing this mistake. Case in point, and this is something that I heard people mention in the last couple of days. Let me give the credit. I think these were mentioned by, I think, Gonzalo Lira, and I think Robert Barnes, and I think Scott Ritter. I think these are the three people I've heard mentioning something to this effect, which is, why does Russia keep so much of its foreign reserves in the Western financial system, such that it can easily be seized? Isn't this a mistake? And I think, if you ask me, I think it is a mistake. It absolutely is a mistake, because you got a large chunk of your country's wealth stolen, essentially stolen by America and its allies, essentially. But even when Russia makes this mistake, it has the potential to benefit from it. Precisely because of this mistake, this event illustrates to the entire world. I think it really has swayed a lot of minds in the Middle East, in Asia, I think perhaps also in Latin America, and certainly in Africa, where people are starting to think really seriously how much trust they should give the Western financial system. How reliable is this system? Can they continue to trade with the US dollar? And I think the answer is clearly no, and no, right? And this can, in fact, help Russia, because if now Russia says that a lot of the energy products that it sells needs to be paid in rubles, that's basically another big push to de-dollarize. Russia is not the only one. It's not the only one that's making big efforts to drive towards de-dollarization. And I think, in the long run, Russia could benefit from a world where dollar is not used as the means, at least, to denominate trades that it needs to engage in. And I think the losers in this regard will be the Europeans and the Americans. Germany, on the other hand. When Germany that makes a mistake, it's almost certainly unintended. Just like Germany went along with the sanctions. How does Germany hurt Russia with the sanctions? Not very much. I don't actually see Germany hurting Russia very much. In fact, in recent weeks, Germany has been buying more energy products from Russia. I don't know. Yes, Germany is not selling a lot of the products to Russia right now, but that's not really hurting a lot, right? I guess perhaps, I don't know for sure, but perhaps Mercedes is not sending car parts to Russia, and it is bad. But down this path, I really question, will there still be a Mercedes-Benz? And will Mercedes-Benz be manufactured, the higher end models, still be manufactured in Germany? Or will all of it be moved to, Morocco? I don't think even the United States. Maybe India? In China, for sure? And what is that going to do for German economy? I don't know. For the workers, for the German people. I don't know. Not many things, can't be good, right? Now let's move on to the second part of today's podcast. Let's talk about the root cause, the leadership styles. And I do realize that this is getting a bit longer than I expected. I thought I would be able to wrap it up in 15 minutes, but I guess it'll just run maybe 5-6 more minutes, maybe 10 minutes. I'll try to do this quick. The root cause, I think, it's cultural. My understanding of these two countries, obviously having lived in neither of them, it's just really an outsider's view. So if you find these views to be incorrect or imprecise, do leave a comment below. But my view, my observation is that Russia is a country that, let's be frank, lacks democratic traditions. It has always had a very centralized governance system. It's even from the Middle Ages, from the Tsarist era, and after the World War I, there was the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was, again, a highly centralized political system. There were some attempts, not really sincere ones, I think. Maybe by the people, there were some sincere attempts to build a democratic Russia. But the efforts were hijacked by Western interests. And Russia was never able to develop a truly democratic system. So it's really a highly centralized political system. But the current Russian leadership leads with foresight. It's more like these type of so-called visionary leaders. Right? Basically, they are able to see a direction for the interest of the country, in this case Russia, and it's able to lead the people towards that direction. And the very fact that Russia has always had a history of more centralized governance system actually makes it more feasible or easier, or perhaps the environment more friendly to such a leader, someone that leads by vision, right? But obviously, Russia does not do well, and I think if there is any cause for concern for Russia, it is that what would the next leadership or the next generation of leadership be? I think I don't know Russian domestic affairs. I like to know more, but I hope, and I'm somewhat confident that they are making an effort in basically, cultivating the next generation of leadership, because that is very important. It's a succession process, not an election process. Right? Elections are held, but whatever. That's Russia. Germany is quite different. German unification was very late in the 19th century, and it had a lot of small city-states. And Germans were always more free people. They were more autonomous. They were more self-reliant. And in some ways, they're more libertarian. And I think a lot of the libertarians in the United States are also of German descent. Of course, a lot of them even more so of Nordic descent, Norwegian, etc. They are very libertarian. But I think to a certain extent also the Germans, they were somewhat libertarian, in my understanding at least. But then they had some difficult period. And then there came a big leader, right? The leader that had all the answers, all the solutions to all Germany's problems. And of course that was a disaster. And from that point on, plus the fact that Germany had always been subjected to American, NATO, and then European, dictates, or diktat, I don't know, probably it's called diktat. Germany just never had a real leader in recent decades. It is true that a lot of the German chancellors had been quite skillful. They have made great efforts in avoiding a lot of conflicts. But they were not really leading in the front. In fact, quite the opposite. With Angela Merkel, her leadership style is best summarized as lead by poll, right? So by popularity or whatever you prefer to say. She finds what is most popular with the German public, and she implements that policy. Now, in fact, she will come out and say that she supports this policy and Germany should implement it. Right. But the problem, again, is that it's also that Germany has a very highly controlled media environment. Not every German is well informed. A lot of them are misinformed and misled by the media. And that is, of course, again, because these media are led from Washington, Brussels, and Brussels. So that really means that these policies are introduced and implemented not necessarily with any vision, any foresight, but really it is what the newspaper said to the public and what the public feels right. That obviously is a disaster. That is a recipe for disaster. Right. It's not really, in my opinion, this style of leadership, it's not really leadership, it's followership. And that has led to the current situation. Of course, it does not help that the German public, to a certain extent, has been infected with Atlanticist or European central, I don't know what is a good word for it, Europeanism, wokeism, and Atlanticism. And it's really a disaster for Germany that just by chance, for whatever reason, that Olaf Scholz became the chancellor. Now, obviously, you can say that Olaf Scholz perhaps is not worse than Annalena Baerbock, or whatever her name is. That's not saying much. The fact that in the aftermath of Angela Merkel, there is not a single true leader in Germany that can pull Germany out of its current quagmire. Well, that is really some food for thought, I think. Now, I hope that I have raised some interesting points in today's podcast. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like, a share, and of course, subscribe. Know that this podcast is also available on Odyssey and Rumble, and you can also find me on drjlt.com. Thank you very much, and have a great day.